When it comes to building your dream gaming PC, figuring out the best graphics card for your needs, wants, and budget is often the most difficult part. Every gamer might love to have an NVIDIA GeForce RTX 2080 Ti, the fastest consumer card right now, but your wallet should have the final say. Excellent performance at high resolutions is only one factor to consider, and you can easily game on much more affordable hardware. The best graphics cards come in a variety of shapes and sizes, and we're here to help you find the perfect GPU, no matter what kind of games you want to play or what your budget looks like. 1. NVIDIA GeForce RTX 2080 Ti. NVIDIA's GeForce RTX 2080 Ti is the latest and most potent GPU around, and it's also one of the largest consumer GPUs ever produced. The Turing TU102 is 60% larger than the Pascal GP102 in the 1080 Ti, with 55% more transistors. Those extra transistors went into more CUDA cores, but NVIDIA didn't stop there, adding in tensor cores to help accelerate deep learning algorithms like DLSS, plus RT cores to accelerate ray tracing. There are plenty of other enhancements in the Turing architecture as well. But if you want the best, be prepared to shell out. If you're looking for the best value, forget about the new RTX cards. On the other hand, if you're eyeing a 4K 144Hz HDR G-Sync display and you want the absolute fastest graphics card around, this is the card for you. You could even try adding a second card and using an NVLink connector, assuming you just won the lottery. We're unlikely to see anything substantially faster for at least a year, so you'll be able to sit comfortably at the top of the pecking order for a while. 2. NVIDIA GeForce RTX 2080. Sure, the RTX 2080 Ti is the fastest graphics card and has all sorts of cool and potentially useful features, but at the current prices, it's a tough pill to swallow. Dropping down to the RTX 2080 will still get you excellent performance. It's the second fastest consumer GPU, edging out the GTX 1080 Ti and saving you cash. And you still get the same ray tracing and deep learning features, e.g. DLSS, albeit not quite as many of each core type. The one major caveat right now is the same as above. We're still waiting for games that enable ray tracing effects and DLSS. Those should start arriving in the next month or so, with a Shadow of the Tomb Raider patch and Battlefield 5. But will the RTX 2080 be powerful enough to use the new features? Most likely not at maximum resolution and quality, but hopefully we'll be able to run at a reduced quality ray tracing mode that will look nearly as good and perform better. 3. AMD Radeon 7. The Radeon 7 is an excellent GPU for content creation duties with gaming as a side job. That's thanks to its massive 16 GB of HBM2 and 1 TB per second of memory bandwidth. It's also the world's first 7nm GPU, which is how AMD reduced the size compared to Vega 64 while boosting performance. If you want the fastest graphics card that this price can buy, you're generally better off with the RTX 2080. It outperforms the Radeon 7 by around 10% on average, and it does that while drawing less power. However, there's something to be said for supporting AMD as an alternative to NVIDIA, and some gamers will take that route. Supply of the Radeon 7 hasn't kept up with demand, at least not yet, but we expect that to change. We also expect to see some custom designs from AMD's AIB partners at some point, but right now, all the Radeon 7 cards use the same reference design. It's a great design though, with triple fans and a stylish enclosure. If you're pulling for Team Red, this is currently as good as it gets. 4. NVIDIA GeForce RTX 2070. The ray tracing future may sound great, but what if you can't afford $700 or more on a graphics card? That's where NVIDIA's RTX 2070 enters the picture, the third Turing GPU and the most affordable of the bunch. More importantly, it's relatively widely available, and there are even a few cards at the base recommended price of $500. That's still a lot of money for a graphics card, and the 2070 is actually slower than the previous generation 1080 Ti, see below, at least in games that don't support DLSS, which is everything for the time being, though that should start to change soon. The RTX 2070 effectively takes over where the GTX 1080 left off. It offers slightly better performance for the same price. And like the other RTX cards, it features the new Tensor and RT cores. The Founders Edition wasn't particularly impressive, given its price premium. But we liked the EVGA 2070 Black quite a bit, and it makes for a fine addition to any new gaming PC. The Gigabyte 2070 Windforce and Asus 2070 Turbo are two more options to consider. And all the 2070 GPUs tend to reach similar maximum overclocks. 5. NVIDIA GeForce RTX 2060. The best graphics card isn't simply the fastest graphics card or the cheapest graphics card. Instead, the best graphics card needs to balance performance, price, and features. But for a great GPU that won't break the bank, NVIDIA's RTX 2060 is probably the best option. It delivers performance roughly equal to the outgoing GTX 1070 Ti, with a lower price, plus all the new RTX features. If you want to play games at 1080p or 1440p on a 144Hz display, the RTX 2060 has the chops to handle most games at close to high or ultra quality. Unless you enable ray tracing in games that support it, at which point it tends to come up short. Still, with its retail price, it's hard not to like the RTX 2060. About the only thing threatening its price or performance ratio is the rumored GTX 1660 Ti. 6. AMD Radeon RX Vega 56 8GB. We had high hopes for Vega prior to its launch, and ultimately it couldn't live up to the hype. Instead of being the Titan killer we hoped for, the Vega 64 and the Vega 56 failed to take down even Nvidia's year-old GTX 1080-1070. But they came close, often leading in DirectX 12 games, and at least prices are affordable these days. Plus, you can make the argument of supporting the underdog to prevent an Nvidia monopoly. The RX Vega 56 is the better buy at current prices, and it will usually handle modern games at 1440p and maybe even 4K. Where it comes up short is in efficiency. The Vega 56 often uses as much power as a GTX 1080 Ti, with performance closer to the new RTX 2060. It's not just about power and heat, but noise levels and longevity. More power on the GPU means more power on the PSU, which means both have fans that need to spin faster. We really want an RTX competitor from AMD, but unfortunately the Radeon 7 isn't it. Until AMD's Navi ships in late 2019, the Vega 56 remains a good upper mid-range value. 7. NVIDIA GTX 1660 Ti. NVIDIA's latest GPU is the GTX 1660 Ti, sort of an odd departure for the new Turing architecture, as NVIDIA removed, or at least disabled, the ray tracing and deep learning hardware that has so far been the focus of a lot of hype, not to mention a little controversy. But along with dropping those features, NVIDIA delivers a lower-priced and impressively efficient design. It mostly takes over for the previous GTX 1060 cards, with more bandwidth and better performance at a similar price. In fact, it's almost a direct replacement in performance for the GTX 1070. There are a few minor drawbacks, however, like sticking with 6GB of VRAM. Yes, the GDDR6 memory delivers 50% more bandwidth than the 1066GB GDDR5, but some newer games are starting to push beyond 6GB at some settings. There's also the missing RTX features. Ray tracing and DLSS might not seem like such a big deal right now, but a few dollars more gets you the faster and potentially more capable RTX 2060. 8. AMD Radeon RX 580 8GB. Many gamers are on a budget, and while faster cards might make you envious, if you're running a 1080p display, they're often overkill. Mainstream GPUs like the RX 570 or 580 and the GTX 1060 3GB or 6GB are close to the original MSRPs, with sales even dropping below MSRP. The RX 580 8GB trades blows with the GTX 1060 6GB, typically winning by a few percent in performance but using more power. The overall victor in the mid-range category is largely determined by local pricing, with the US market currently favoring the RX 580. You can find the RX 580 8GB for less, hitting the sweet spot for some mainstream gamers. That undercuts both GTX 1060 models as well as AMD's own RX 590. The 590 is about 10 to 15% faster, but costs 40% more. Until the RX 590 prices drop, or we see a better mainstream successor, the 580 8GB remains one of the best values in graphics cards. 9. NVIDIA GeForce GTX 1060 6GB. NVIDIA's older GTX 1060 cards are an alternative to the RX 580 or 570, though with the arrival of the GTX 1660 Ti above, we expect supply of the 10 series cards to dry up. For now, however, the price has dropped and the 1060 6GB still delivers good performance. The loss of 2GB VRAM relative to the RX 580 isn't really a concern in most games, especially at 1080p, which is where these cards do best. 1440p is possible, but only at sometimes significantly lower quality settings. The biggest benefit of the GTX 1060 is that it uses about 50 watts less power than the RX 580. That's less heat and a quieter build, though power savings will likely only add up to $1 or $2 per month, unless you game a whole lot. If you don't want the RX 580 or GTX 1660 Ti, this is a great card. There will probably be a GTX 1660 non-Ti card to replace this in the not-too-distant future. 10. AMD Radeon RX 570 4GB. AMD's Polaris architecture version 2 is in the Radeon RX 570 and 580. The RX 570 4GB has now dropped well below its original target, and if you're looking for a 1080p card, you really won't find a better bargain. Overall, the RX 580 4GB typically comes out slightly ahead of the GTX 1060 3GB, and while it does use a bit more power, it also costs less than the cheapest 1060. Most desktops are more than capable of running this 150-watt card without any difficulty, and it pretty much kills off the market for anything lower. The biggest concern with the RX 570 is that it's getting old, and if you opt for the cheaper 4GB model, future games could present a problem. Then again, running future games at ultra quality probably isn't viable regardless. For lighter fare like Overwatch or CSGO, this is more than enough GPU and should keep you happily gaming for several years. 11. AMD Radeon RX 560 4GB. When it comes to budget graphics cards, the primary competitors are AMD's RX 560 and Nvidia's GTX 1050. Currently, the RX 560 4GB costs less than the GTX 1050 2GB and typically performs slightly better, especially at low to medium quality and 1080p, where competitive gamers like to hang out. That makes it the easy choice for the budget category, though the RX 570 mentioned above is much faster for just $30 more. If you really can't afford much more than $100, the RX 560 4GB is great for lighter esports games, including CSGO, LOL, Overwatch, and more. It can easily hit 60 frames per second at 1080p in most games at low to high quality, depending on the game, which is about as much as we can ask of such a card. Just know that the RX 560 is at the very bottom of what we consider acceptable performance and is likely to struggle with the new crop of demanding games.